All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something I think a lot of you can relate to, especially if you're learning English. That feeling when you learn a new word, you're feeling pretty good about it, and then, bam, it's just gone.
Yeah, it's like you never even learned it.
Poof, vanished.
Totally.
Yeah,
Happens all the time, and it's super frustrating. I mean, you're putting in the work, right?
it is, it is. So that's exactly what we're going to dig into today. How to make those new English words actually stick. We're looking at this transcript from a YouTube channel called Easy English Talk. And they break down some pretty useful strategies for remembering vocabulary.
Exactly, and it's not just about brute force memorization, which we all know doesn't really work long term.
Nope, not at all. They actually get into why we forget words in the first place, and then they give you tools to actually work with how your brain already operates. So think of this as your brain hack guide to learning English vocab.
I like that. A brain hack guide.
Yeah. So first things first, why do we even forget these words? What's the deal with that?
Well, they talk about this thing called a forgetting curve. Basically, our brains are always deciding what info is important enough to keep around.
Mm.
And if we don't actively use new info, like vocabulary, the brain's like, okay, because I don't need this. And it starts to, clear it out.
It's like a mental decluttering process, but not always a helpful one when you're trying to learn something new.
Exactly. And they actually mentioned a statistic that within a day, you can forget something like half of what you've learned if you don't review it.
Wow, 50%. That's a pretty big chunk.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
So clearly, just seeing a word once or twice isn't enough. It's got to be a more ongoing thing. And another big point they made, think back to when you were in school, learning those vocabulary lists for tests. How much of that stuff do you actually remember now?
Oh, very little. I mean, maybe a word or two if I'm lucky.
Right. And the transcript pointed out that that's because we were learning those words in isolation just for the test. There was no real context, no understanding of how to actually use them in real life. They were just kind of these floating words in our heads.
Yeah, not anchored to anything meaningful. It's like trying to learn to swim by just reading about it in a textbook.
Exactly. You need to get in the water and practice those strokes.
Definitely. And speaking of practice, the transcript really hammered home the importance of actually speaking the new words you're learning, not just reading them or understanding their definitions, but actually saying them out loud.
Totally. It's about making them an active part of your vocabulary, not just something you passively recognize. Because when you actually say a word out loud, your brain has to work harder to retrieve it from your memory, and that strengthens those neural connections. It's like exercising a muscle.
Makes sense. So basically, if you're not reviewing, if you're not learning words in context, and if you're not speaking those words, well, that's why they're disappearing from your memory.
Exactly. Now let's move on to the good stuff, the actual techniques for making those words stick. And their first one was all about association.
Okay, association. So how does that work? What's the main idea there?
So it's basically connecting that new word to something you already know, creating a link in your brain. It could be a picture, a sound, a personal experience.
So it's like anchoring the new word to something familiar.
Yeah, and that makes it way more memorable. They gave some great examples in the transcript, like take the word apple. You don't just think of the letters A-P-P-L-E, right?
Right.
You think of maybe a big, red, shiny apple, or maybe a green one. Maybe you even imagine taking a bite and tasting it. That's engaging all your senses, making the memory stronger.
And they said making it personal really helps.
Yes, connecting it to a memory you have, like your grandma's apple pie. And they also talked about using mnemonics. Remember their example for the word gigantic?
I do. It was something about a giant, wasn't it?
Yeah, a giant holding a big sign that says gigantic on it. Kind of funny, right?
Yeah, definitely memorable.
That's the whole point. Those silly, outlandish images, they stick with us way better than something plain. It's like creating a little movie in your head for each word.
I like that. And what about word linking? They mentioned that too.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. So for a word like procrastinate, imagine someone on a couch saying, I'll do it later, surrounded by piles of work. You're connecting the word's sound and meaning with a visual.
And they even suggested trying to link the new word to a similar sounding word in your native language, if there is one.
Clever, right?
Yay.
That gives you an instant connection. And then, of course, there's the storytelling approach. They use the example of sun, beach, and relax.
Oh, yeah. So weaving those words together into a mini story, like I'm lying on the beach, feeling the warm sun, completely relaxed. Your brain loves stories.
It does. It's like filing those words away as part of a scene.
Yeah.
And because we're wired for stories, we remember them way better.
So with association, you're basically creating all these little memory hooks. Using images, making it personal, being silly, connecting to your native language, and even telling stories.
Exactly. It's all about finding ways to make that new word meaningful to you.
All right, so we've built those initial connections, but now how do we make them stick for the long haul?
That's where spaced repetition comes in, and they paired that with active recall.
Spaced repetition. Okay, so tell me about that.
So instead of cramming and trying to remember everything at once, you space out your review sessions.
Yeah.
You learn a word today, review it tomorrow, then 3 days later, then a week later, and so on. You're giving your brain time to process and absorb the info.
So it's not about intensity, it's about consistency.
Precisely. And every time you successfully recall that word, that connection gets stronger in your brain. Like a path in the woods, the more you walk it, the clearer it becomes.
Makes sense. And what about active recall? How's that different from just rereading your notes?
Active recall is all about forcing your brain to actually retrieve the information without any hints.
So no peeking at the definition.
Yep. You're really challenging yourself to remember the word's meaning.
Hmm.
And that struggle, that effort to recall it, is what makes the memory stronger. They suggested some good methods for this.
Like flashcards. That's a classic for a reason, I guess.
Right. Word on one side, definition on the other. And quizzes, too, testing yourself. They also mentioned writing practice, trying to use those words in sentences.
Putting them into action.
Yes. And of course, there's speaking practice, consciously trying to use those words in your conversations. Which takes us back to our earlier point about speaking out loud.
It all comes full circle. So spaced repetition and active recall, those are the dynamic duo for long-term memory.
They are. They work together to make sure those words don't fade away.
So what's next? We've built the association, we've used spaced repetition and active recall. How do we really start using those words in everyday life?
That was their next big point. Using the words in your daily routine. It's about making them a natural part of your English.
They had some pretty simple suggestions, like talking to yourself in English throughout the day.
Yeah, it might feel strange at first, but it's a low-pressure way to practice. Like, as you're making coffee, you can describe what you're doing. I'm pouring the water. I'm adding the coffee grounds.
This coffee smells delicious.
Exactly. They also talked about labeling things around your house.
Oh yeah, like putting a little sticker that says door on your door.
Simple but effective. You see it every day, and it reinforces the word. And they also mentioned writing, like keeping a journal in English. You don't have to write a novel, just some thoughts about your day, or even just a to-do list.
I like that. And it doesn't have to be perfect grammar either.
Nope, not at all. It's about getting those words out there. And then there's the social aspect, like texting with other English learners or using social media in English.
Yeah, commenting on posts, writing captions, following English language accounts that you're interested in.
All those little interactions add up. The main takeaway is that even small, consistent effort makes a huge difference.
It's about weaving those words into the fabric of your day.
Exactly. All right, now let's shift gears a little and talk about listening and speaking.
Okay, so how does listening help us remember words?
Listening is huge because you're hearing words used naturally in context. Think about listening to a podcast or watching a movie. You're picking up on how words are pronounced, how they're used in different situations.
That's like passive learning, but in a good way?
Yeah, you're absorbing it without even realizing it. The transcript suggested listening to things like English podcasts, audiobooks, or news broadcasts. Even if you don't understand everything at first, it's that repeated exposure that matters. And then, of course, we have speaking.
The other side of the coin.
Right. And they really stress the importance of not being afraid to make mistakes. Just start speaking.
Easier said than done sometimes.
I know, but it's crucial. The more you use those words, the more confident you'll become. They even mentioned a technique called shadowing.
Oh, tell me about that.
So you listen to a sentence in English, and then you repeat it immediately, trying to copy the pronunciation and intonation.
Like a vocal echo.
Exactly. It's a great way to improve both your pronunciation and your ability to recall those words when you're speaking. And they gave some easy ways to practice listening and speaking. Make daily listening a habit, try shadowing, talk to yourself in English, and if you can, find a language partner to practice with.
Lots good options there. So listening helps us absorb words naturally, and speaking helps us solidify those connections. All right, their last technique was all about making learning fun.
Learning with emotions and storytelling.
That sounds right up my alley.
Because when we enjoy something, we remember it better.
Absolutely.
They started with music, learning with songs. I think we all know how easily song lyrics get stuck in our head.
Oh yeah, music is powerful.
And singing along also helps with pronunciation. They also mention word games like Scrabble, crosswords, and all those language learning apps.
Gamifying learning, it's a good strategy.
It takes the pressure off. And then there's TPR, total physical response.
TPR, I've heard of that.
It's basically acting out the words. So if you're learning the word jump, you actually jump.
It's engaging your whole body.
Exactly. And it creates a strong memory link. And finally, they brought back the idea of storytelling, creating those silly, memorable narratives.
The weirder, the better.
Exactly. Our brains are drawn to the unusual.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. What are the key takeaways, the big picture?
Okay, so first we talk about why we forget words. That forgetting curve, lack of context, and not enough speaking practice. Then we dove into those 5 awesome techniques from Easy English Talk: association, spaced repetition, and active recall, using words daily, listening and speaking practice, and learning with emotions and storytelling.
A lot to unpack, but really valuable stuff.
And the main message throughout all of this is consistency. It doesn't have to be hours and hours of study. Just a little bit each day makes a huge difference.
Little and often wins the race.
Exactly. And most importantly, try to enjoy the process. Learning should be fun.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. So many practical ways to tackle that whole vocabulary problem.
I agree. It's all about working with our brains, not against them.
And I think a good challenge for all our listeners is to pick one of these techniques and try it out today. Choose a new word you're struggling with and get creative with it.
Yeah, make a silly association, use it in a sentence, write a mini story.
Put it into action.
And remember, language learning is a journey. Keep exploring, find what works for you, and celebrate those small wins.
Shouldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you on the next one. Keep learning, keep growing.